Power can build an empire, but it cannot bury a ghost. For Julian Croft, a titan of industry whose name was a synonym for ruthless success. The past was a locked and forgotten room. He commanded the world from glass towers and moved fortunes with a single phone call, his life a fortress of calculated control. But on an ordinary Tuesday night inside New York's most exclusive steakhouse, a young waitress would hand him the key. It wasn't a business proposal or a fan's adoration. It was a simple folded note that would prove to be the most devastating liability of his entire life. The world of Julian Croft was one of calculated precision. It was a world of sterile glass towers that pierced the Manhattan skyline, of encrypted video calls that decided the fate of thousands, and of a silence in his personal life that was as profound as it was self-imposed. At 58, his face was a testament to his journey. Sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Framed by lines, etched not by laughter, but by decades of relentless focus and sleepless nights. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, his suit a bespoke creation from a tailor whose name was only spoken in hushed tones, cost more than the car most people drove. Tonight he was dining at the Gilded Steer, a restaurant so exclusive that its phone number was unlisted. It was a place for celebrating 9-figure deals and conducting hostile takeovers over bone-in ribeyes. For Julian, however, it was just Tuesday. A placeholder between a 14-hour workday and an empty penthouse that overlooked Central Park, like a lonely god. He sat in a secluded corner booth, the plush leather sighing under his weight. The ambient light was the color of old whiskey, catching the crystal of his water glass and the silver of his Patek Philippe watch. He wasn't waiting for anyone. Company was an inefficiency he rarely tolerated. "Good evening, sir. My name is Mia, and I'll be your server tonight." He didn't look up from the wine list, a tome bound in Moroccan leather. "A bottle of the 98 Screaming Eagle Cabernet, and I'll have the A5 Wagyu medium rare. Don't let the chef rest it for more than 7 minutes." "Of course, sir," the voice replied. It was soft with a tremor of nervousness he registered, but immediately dismissed. She was young. They were all young, nervous, and interchangeable. He heard her footsteps retreat the quiet tap, tap, tap on the polished oak floor. For 20 minutes, Julian worked. His tablet was propped against the water carafe, its screen glowing with stock tickers and encrypted emails. He moved markets with a flick of his thumb, his focus absolute. The world outside his booth, the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of cutlery, the distant sizzle from the kitchen, was nothing but white noise. Mia returned her movements, practiced, but still tinged with an unsteadiness that was out of place in such a seamless establishment. She presented the wine with the reverence of a priest, handling a holy relic, decanting the deep ruby liquid with a steady hand that belied the nerves in her voice. He gave a curt nod of approval, his eyes never leaving the screen. When the steak arrived, it was perfect. A flawless slab of marbled beef, seared to a dark crust its center, a warm, vibrant pink. It was a testament to craft and quality, two things Julian deeply respected. He finally put his tablet away, allowing himself this one small, solitary pleasure. He ate with the same efficiency he applied to everything else, methodical, appreciative, but not indulgent. As he savored the last bite, Mia reappeared to clear the plate. "Was everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He was momentarily surprised she used his name, but then remembered he had a standing reservation. It was part of the service. "It was acceptable," he said, his highest form of compliment. He reached for his wallet, a slim piece of black crocodile skin. He would leave a generous tip not out of kindness, but because it was expected. As she reached for the plate, her fingers brushed against his. It was a fleeting accidental contact, but it felt like a jolt of static electricity. For the first time all evening he looked up at her. She wasn't just young, she was achingly so. Probably early 20s. She had large, expressive eyes the color of dark honey, a spray of freckles across her nose, and brown hair tied back in a simple, severe ponytail that did little to tame the stray wisps framing her face. She looked tired. Not just end-of-shift tired, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that seemed to reside in the slight slump of her shoulders. But in her eyes there was a spark, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Fear. Defiance. Her hand trembled as she placed the bill folder on the table. "Thank you for dining with us, sir." But as she pulled her hand away, something remained. A small, neatly folded piece of paper, the same color and texture as a napkin, now sat beside the black leather folder. It was a flagrant breach of protocol, a waitress soliciting a patron. He felt a flash of irritation. Was this a business proposal, a desperate plea for a handout? He had his security team deal with this sort of thing weekly. He fixed her with a cold stare, expecting her to shrink away. Instead, she met his gaze for a fraction of a second. Her honey-colored eyes held an impossible depth of emotion, an apology, a plea, and a desperate hope, all warring for dominance. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the orchestrated chaos of the restaurant. Julian sighed, annoyed at the interruption. He picked up the note, intending to discard it with the bill. But curiosity, a long dormant emotion, got the better of him. He unfolded the small square of paper. The handwriting was a delicate, slightly shaky cursive. It wasn't a phone number. It wasn't a request for money. It was just a single sentence. 8 words that took the air from his lungs and sent a tremor through his ruthlessly controlled world. The note read, "Do you remember the promise under the willow tree?" And beneath it, a single devastating initial. E. Time for Julian. Croft had always been a linear progression, a commodity to be managed and maximized. But in the instant he read those words, time fractured. The present, the opulent restaurant, the half-empty wine glass, the scent of seared beef and old money receded into a distant hum. He was no longer in a Manhattan steakhouse. He was 20 years old, standing on the damp grass of a university campus, the scent of summer rain in the air. The willow tree. The memory so deeply buried, he'd thought it fossilized, erupted into his mind with the force of a geyser. It was vivid, visceral. He could feel the rough bark against his back, see the way the setting sun filtered through the long, weeping branches, painting golden stripes on her face. Her face, Elara. The initial E burned on the page, a brand on his soul. Elara Vance. His Elara. The only woman he had ever truly loved. The woman who had vanished from his life nearly 40 years ago. The woman who was dead. His knuckles were white as he gripped the table's edge. A cold dread, colder than any boardroom negotiation, washed over him. His heart, a reliable and steady organ, hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Dead. She had died in a car accident, a fiery crash on a winding coastal highway in California. He'd received the news via a stilted third-hand phone call. There was no funeral he could attend, no family to console. She was an orphan just like him. There was just an abyss where she used to be. The grief had hollowed him out, and he had filled the void with work ambition and a relentless pursuit of power. He had built his empire on her grave. Sir Mr. Croft, is everything all right? The restaurant manager, a portly man named Francois, with a perpetually worried expression, was standing by his table. Julian realized he had been sitting there for minutes motionless, staring at the note. His breathing was shallow. "I'm fine." Julian clipped out his voice a low growl. He quickly folded the note, his movements stiff and unnatural, and slipped it into his breast pocket. It felt like it was scorching the fabric of his suit. The bill. He signed the check with a hand that was not quite steady, adding a tip that was so large it made Francois's eyes widen. He didn't care. He needed to get out. He needed air. As he strode through the restaurant, his composure a carefully reconstructed mask. He scanned the staff. He was looking for the waitress, Mia, but she was gone, vanished. The moment the frigid night air hit his face on 6th Avenue, he pulled out his phone. His driver, a stoic man named Thomas, was already pulling the Maybach to the curb. But Julian didn't get in. He dialed a number from his secure contacts. It rang once. "Chen!" The voice on the other end was clipped alert. David Chen was the head of his personal security and corporate intelligence, a man who could find a ghost in a fog bank. "I need a name," Julian said, his voice tight. "A waitress. Her name is Mia. Works at the Gilded Steer. First name only. That's all I have. Young, early 20s, brown hair, honey-colored eyes." The description felt strangely intimate, and he hated it. "Consider it done," Chen said. There was no question of why. There never was. "I want everything," Julian continued, his voice dropping lower as a group of laughing tourists passed by. Her full name, address, date of birth, social security number, work history, financial records, family friends, her favorite goddamn color. I want to know who she is, where she came from, and who she talked to this morning. And I want to know how she got this." He paused the note in his pocket, feeling heavier than a bar of gold. How she got this information. Information. Chen's professional curiosity was piqued. "Personal," Julian snapped. "Deeply personal. This isn't corporate. This is something else." "Understood. I'll have a preliminary report for you within the hour." Julian hung up and finally slid into the silent, leather-scented cocoon of the Maybach. As the car pulled silently into the stream of city traffic, the glittering lights of Manhattan blurred into meaningless streaks of color. His mind was a maelstrom. Who was this girl, Mia? A con artist, a blackmailer who had somehow unearthed the one secret, the one vulnerability he possessed. It had to be. Someone had dug into his past, found the story of Elara, and was now trying to exploit it. The idea filled him with a white-hot rage. He had built firewalls around his life, both digital and emotional. The thought that someone had breached them was intolerable. But another, more insidious thought wormed its way into his mind. The handwriting, the specific phrasing, the promise under the willow tree. It wasn't a generic reference. It was a moment in time known only to two people. He had promised her he would always find her, always protect her, no matter what. It was a foolish, passionate promise made by a young man who thought love could conquer the world. A promise he had failed to keep. How could anyone else know that he had never spoken of Elara to another living soul? Not his business partners, not his ex-wife, not even his therapist during the brief court-mandated sessions after his divorce. Elara was a sealed chapter, a ghost he had learned to live with. When he arrived at his penthouse, the sprawling space felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. He walked past priceless works of art, minimalist furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing a city that felt alien to him. He went straight to his bar and poured a generous amount of Macallan 25 into a crystal tumbler. The amber liquid did nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep in his bones. His phone buzzed. It was a secure message from Chen. He opened it. Subject, preliminary report, Monsieur Russo. Name, Amelia Mia Russo. Age, 23. Address, 4P. 187th Street, Washington Heights. DOB, April 12, 2002. Citizen US. Initial checks show a clean record. No criminal history. Not even a parking ticket. Works 2 jobs, waitressing at the Gilded Steer evenings and a barista at a coffee shop in her neighborhood mornings. Currently enrolled part-time at Hunter College, studying art history. Outstanding student loans, $47,281. Rent is 2 weeks overdue. Bank account balance, $112.38. No known associates with criminal ties. No connection to any of our corporate rivals. Her digital footprint is minimal. Social media is private, mostly pictures of paintings and her cat. In short, she appears to be exactly what she is. A broke, overworked college student. Julian stared at the screen. This wasn't the profile of a sophisticated blackmailer or a corporate spy. This was the profile of a struggling young woman. It made no sense. If she was trying to extort him, her life wouldn't be this transparently desperate. He scrolled down. Chen had attached a low-resolution photo, likely pulled from her student ID. It was her, the same toad intelligent eyes. Amelia Russo. The name meant nothing to him. Then came the final line of the report. The line that made Julian drop his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing the sudden splintering of his certainty. One more thing. Her mother's name was Sarah Russo. Deceased. But her maternal grandmother's maiden name. It was Vance. Elara Vance. The name on the screen, Elara Vance, was not just a piece of data. It was an incantation that summoned the past with breathtaking force. Julian Croft, the man who controlled boardrooms and swayed global markets, was completely and utterly adrift. He sank into a low armchair, the shards of glass from his fallen tumbler, crunching unnoticed beneath his expensive shoe. Washington Heights. A struggling student, a grandmother named Elara Vance. The pieces didn't fit. They were puzzle pieces from 2 entirely different boxes, forced together by the impossible note now lying on his marble countertop. His mind, trained to analyze data and find patterns, rebelled against the illogical. The official story was that Elara Vance, aged 21, had died in a single vehicle accident on the Pacific Coast Highway 40 years ago. Her car had gone off a cliff. She had been identified by dental records. It was a closed case, a tragic footnote in the life of a young woman with a bright future. A future that was supposed to have been with him. He closed his eyes, and the sterile, modern lines of his penthouse dissolved, replaced by the sun-drenched green of the university quad. Summer 1985. He wasn't Julian Croft, the Titan. He was just Julian, a scholarship kid with a ferocious intellect and a chip on his shoulder the size of a paving stone. He was all raw ambition, fueled by a desperate need to escape the poverty of his childhood. He saw the world as a ladder, and he was determined to climb it, No matter who he had to step on. And then there was Elara. She wasn't like the other girls who were either chasing MS's degrees or trying to out-radicalize each other in political science seminars. Elara was a fine arts major. She saw the world not as a ladder, but as a canvas. She found beauty in the mundane, the pattern of rust on a fire escape, the muted colors of a pigeon's wing, the way light fell across an old book. She saw something in him too. Beneath his abrasive exterior and his relentless drive, she saw a flicker of the boy he'd once been a boy, who was scared and lonely. She challenged him, softened him, and for the first time in his life, made him feel seen. Their sanctuary was an ancient, sprawling willow tree near the campus lake. Its branches drooped to the ground, creating a hidden green-lit room. It was there they shared their secrets and their dreams. He would talk of building companies, of changing the world through technology. She would talk of painting, of capturing fleeting moments, of truth and beauty. "You're going to be so successful, Julian," she had told him one afternoon, her head resting in his lap. "You'll be a king in a glass castle, only if you're in it with me," he had replied, his voice thick with a sincerity that embarrassed him even then. "I don't belong in castles," she had said, her expression turning serious. "The world you're chasing, it scares me. The people in it are sharks." "I'll protect you," he had insisted, a fierce primal urge rising in him. "I promise. No matter where you are, no matter what happens, I will always find you. I will always keep you safe. That's my promise to you under this willow tree." She had smiled a sad, knowing smile and traced the lines of his palm. "I'll hold you to that, Julian Croft." A few months later, she was gone. She had moved to California to pursue a prestigious art internship. They spoke on the phone every night. He was busy, consumed by his final exams and a business plan he was co-developing with his roommate, a brilliant but volatile programmer named Marcus Thorne. Then came the call. A police officer with a weary voice. An accident. A confirmation. A world ending. Marcus had been there for him in his own callous way. "Tragic," he'd said, clapping Julian on the shoulder. "But you can't let it stop you. We've got work to do. Empires to build." And so Julian had built. He and Marcus founded what would become a tech giant, but their partnership soured into a bitter rivalry. Marcus was reckless, amoral. Julian was ruthless, but he had lines. They clashed, and Julian eventually forced him out in a legendary hostile takeover. The enmity between them was now the stuff of business legend. But Julian's success was always haunted by Elara's absence. Every achievement was tainted by the fact that he couldn't share it with her. He opened his eyes. The penthouse was silent. The past was gone, but its questions remained sharper and more urgent than ever. If Elara had a daughter, Sarah Russo, and that daughter had a child, Amelia Russo, then Elara hadn't died in that car crash. The entire foundation of his adult life, the grief that had shaped him, was a lie. Why? Why would she fake her own death and disappear? Why would she let him believe she was gone for 40 years? The pain of that thought was a physical blow, a betrayal so profound it eclipsed the initial shock. And then a darker thought crept in. A memory of Elara's words. "The world you're chasing, it scares me. The people in it are sharks." Was it something to do with him? With his burgeoning career? With his ambitious, cutthroat partner, Marcus Thorne? The pieces began to shift, to rearrange themselves into a new, terrifying mosaic. He stood up, his movements decisive. The paralysis was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had been living with a ghost for 40 years. Now it seemed the ghost was not only real, but had sent him a messenger. He picked up his phone and called David Chen again. "Chen, I'm sending you an address in Washington Heights. I want a team on it. Subtle. I don't want her spooked. I want to know who comes and goes. I want to know her routine. I want to know everything she does." "Understood. Eyes on Amelia Russo." "And Chen," Julian added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "dig up everything you can on a car accident. Pacific Coast Highway, circa 1986. Victim's name, Elara Vance. I want the police report, the coroner's report, the dental records used for identification. Everything. I don't care what archives you have to break into. I want to know if the woman who died in that car was really her." "You think it wasn't?" Chen asked, the surprise evident even in his monotonic voice. Julian looked at the note on his counter, at the single letter E that had upended his universe. "I think," he said slowly, "that for the past 40 years I've been believing a very well-told lie." The next 48 hours were the longest of Julian Croft's life. He moved through his scheduled meetings and conference calls like an automaton. His mind, usually a razor-sharp instrument of commerce, was a fog of unanswered questions. David Chen's team was in place, their updates on Amelia Russo's movements, painting a picture of mundane struggle. She woke up at 5 a.m., took the subway to the coffee shop, worked an 8-hour shift, took a different train to her art history class, and then another to the Gilded Steer, often not returning to her tiny apartment until after 1 a.m. She lived on cheap pizza and instant noodles. There were no mysterious visitors, no clandestine phone calls, just work, study, and exhaustion. Chen's other team, the digital archaeologists, were hitting walls. The records from the 1986 car crash were proving stubbornly difficult to access. The physical files were supposedly lost in a precinct basement flood in the 90s. The digital copies were corrupted or missing. It was all too convenient, too clean. It reeked of a cover-up. Julian knew he couldn't wait for Chen's slow, methodical work. He needed answers now. He couldn't storm into the girl's apartment, and confronting her at the high-end steakhouse was out of the question. That left one option. The coffee shop in Washington Heights was a world away from Julian's usual haunts. It was small, with mismatched furniture, the smell of roasted coffee beans and burnt sugar thick in the air. Local art adorned the walls, and a jazz station played softly from a corner speaker. It was a place with character, a place with a soul. Julian, in his $1,000 suit, felt as out of place as a wolf in a petting zoo. He saw her behind the counter, her hair tied up in a messy bun, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She was wearing a faded t-shirt and a flour-dusted apron. Here, away from the oppressive formality of the Gilded Steer, she looked younger, less terrified. She moved with an easy, practiced grace, steaming milk, pulling espresso shots, calling out orders. He took a seat at a small table in the back, picking up a newspaper as a prop. He watched her for 10 minutes. He saw the easy way she smiled at a regular, the patience with which she explained the difference between a macchiato and a cortado to a confused tourist. There was a warmth to her, a genuine kindness that seemed at odds with the desperate act of slipping a note to a billionaire. Her shift ended at 2 p.m. She untied her apron, grabbed a worn backpack from a back room, and bought a day-old pastry from the counter. As she walked out the door, Julian followed, keeping a discreet distance. She didn't head for the subway. Instead, she walked to a small nearby park and sat on a bench, staring at a flock of pigeons as she ate her pastry. This was his chance. He approached slowly, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel path. She heard him and looked up. The moment she saw him, the color drained from her face. Her eyes widened in panic, and she shot to her feet, ready to bolt. "Amelia Russo," he said, his voice calm and even, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk." "How do you know my name?" she whispered, clutching her backpack to her chest like a shield. "I have resources," he said simply. "It wasn't difficult. What's difficult is understanding why you gave me that note. I want you to tell me what it means, now." She swallowed hard, her gaze darting around the park. I can't. Not here." "Then where?" he pressed, taking a step closer. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes and softened his tone slightly. "Listen, I'm not angry. I'm confused. That note, it refers to something only one other person in the world could possibly know, a person I believe to be dead. So you have my complete undivided attention. Tell me who you are." Tears welled in her eyes and she shook her head. "You don't understand. I shouldn't have done it. It was stupid. I was desperate. Please just forget about it. Throw the note away." "It's a little late for that," he said, his voice hardening again. "You opened a door I thought was sealed forever. You don't get to close it now. Who is E?" Her resolve crumbled. A single tear traced a path through the faint dusting of flour on her cheek. "It's who you think it is," she said, her voice cracking. "It's my grandmother, Elara." Julian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Hearing the name spoken aloud, connected to this young woman, made it terrifyingly real. "Your grandmother is alive." "Mia." Amelia nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes, she's alive, but she's sick. Very sick. And we're out of money. The insurance ran out. The hospital was going to move her to a state facility, a place people go to die. I was desperate. I saw your name on the reservation list. I knew who you were. She used to tell me stories about a brilliant, ambitious boy named Julian. About a promise." The words hit him like a physical assault. Elara was alive, but she was dying. And she had been reduced to this, sending her granddaughter, a child burdened with an impossible legacy, to beg for help from a ghost from her past. "Why?" Julian asked, the single word loaded with 40 years of pain and confusion. "Why did she disappear? Why did she let me think she was dead?" Amelia looked over her shoulder again, a flicker of that same fear returning. She had to. She was being threatened. She was scared. Not for herself, but for her family. For my mother. "Threatened by whom?" Julian demanded. The story was spiraling, getting darker and more complex with every sentence. Amelia hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. "She never told me everything, just that it was someone from your world, someone from the very beginning of your company, someone powerful and ruthless." Julian's mind raced, sifting through the ghosts of his early career. There were dozens of rivals' enemies he had crushed on his way to the top. But who would threaten Elara? Why, it made no sense. "I need a name, Amelia." "She made me promise not to say," Amelia whispered. "He's still out there, still powerful. She's terrified of him even now." "I am more powerful." Julian stated the words, coming out as cold as steel. It was not a boast. It was a fact. "I can protect you. I can protect her. But you have to tell me who did this, who stole 40 years of my life." Amelia looked at him truly. looked at him. She saw past the billionaire, past the cold facade, and saw the raw pain in his eyes. She saw the 20-year-old boy who had lost the love of his life. And in that moment, she made a decision. She took a shaky breath and spoke the name. A name that caused the blood to turn to ice in Julian Croft's veins. His name is Marcus Thorne. The name hung in the air of the small park, a poison that contaminated 4 decades of history. Marcus Thorne. Julian felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice. It wasn't just the name of his co-founder, his former friend, his most bitter and hated rival. It was the sudden, sickening clarity that came with it. All the disjointed pieces of his past slammed into place, forming a picture of such monstrous betrayal that it stole his breath. Marcus and Julian. They had been the 2 sides of the same coin. Julian was the strategist, the visionary. Marcus was the charming, reckless salesman, the one who could sell ice in a blizzard. But beneath the charm, Marcus was a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice. He lacked a moral compass. In the early days, Julian had seen it as a necessary ruthlessness. Now he saw it for what it was, a pathology. He knew her. Julian said the words more to himself than to Amelia. He knew about us. She said he was obsessed, Amelia whispered, sensing she had just lit a fuse. She said he was charming at first, but then he got scary. He saw her as something you had that he wanted, a prize. When she refused his advances, he couldn't handle it. He told her that if she stayed with you, he would ruin you, and if that didn't work, he would hurt you. She believed him. The willow tree. The promise. I'll protect you. He had promised to be her shield, but he had unknowingly been the very reason she needed one. His ambition, his partnership with a serpent had been the threat all along. The car, accident. The conveniently lost files. Marcus was wealthy and connected even then, bribing a few small-town cops a coroner. For him, it would have been trivial. He had forced Elara to fake her death, threatening to harm Julian if she ever tried to contact him. He had orchestrated the entire tragedy, then stood by Julian's side, offering hollow condolences while celebrating his victory in secret. He hadn't just stolen Julian's love. He had weaponized his grief, using it to ensure Julian's focus remained solely on building the company, their company. A volcanic rage, cold and terrifyingly precise, began to build within Julian. It was the same controlled fury he brought to a hostile takeover. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was a debt of blood and time that had been compounding for 40 years. "Where is she?" he asked Amelia, his voice dangerously quiet. "A small nursing home in upstate New York. It's not the best place. But it was all we could afford," she admitted, her voice thick with shame. "I visit every weekend." "Not anymore," Julian said, pulling out his phone. He dialed a number. "Dr. Evans, it's Julian Croft. I have a patient who needs to be transferred to your private wing at Mount Sinai immediately. Her name is Elara Vance." "Yes, Vance. I want your best team, your best room, and absolute discretion. A helicopter will be en route to a location I'm about to send you within the hour. Spare no expense." He hung up and looked at Amelia, whose face was a mask of stunned disbelief. "You're not going back to your apartment," he continued, already dialing David Chen. "You're not going back to either of your jobs. As of this moment, you are under my protection. A car will be here in 5 minutes to take you to a secure suite at the Four Seasons. Pack nothing. We will buy you whatever you need. You are not to contact anyone. Is that clear?" She could only nod, overwhelmed. "Chen," he spoke into the phone, "execute the Thorne protocol." There was a moment of silence on the other end. The Thorne protocol was a contingency plan Julian had created years ago, a doomsday file on his rival. It was a collection of every piece of dirt, every questionable deal, every legal grey area Marcus Thorne had ever been involved in. It was a weapon of mutually assured destruction, intended for use only if Marcus ever crossed a final line. "Are you certain, Julian?" Chen's voice was grave. "This is scorched earth." "Light the match," Julian said. "And I want our legal team ready. I also want you to find 2 people for me. A retired police officer from the Monterey County Sheriff's Department and a coroner from the same jurisdiction, both active in 1986. Find them. Offer them anything, money, protection, and new life. I want them to talk." He ended the call. The gears were in motion. The full crushing weight of Julian Croft's empire was now being aimed at one man. This would not be a quick battle. It would be a meticulous, systematic annihilation. "What are you going to do?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. Julian looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had not seen before. "Your grandmother told you I was a king in a glass castle. She was right. And what a king does, Amelia, when a serpent gets into his garden, is he cuts off its head." Over the next few days, Julian orchestrated his war from a suite he had taken across the hall from Amelia's. While she was being debriefed by his staff, fitted for new clothes, and speaking with the doctors who were now overseeing Elara's care, Julian was dismantling Marcus Thorne's life piece by piece. Chen's team worked miracles. They located the retired coroner, a man named Albert Wesker, living in a trailer park in Arizona. Racked with guilt and a gambling addiction, it took very little persuasion for him to confess. He had been paid $50,000 in 1986 to falsify dental records for a Jane Doe victim of a hit-and-run and switch them with Elara's. The money had come from a shell corporation that Chen's forensic accountants, armed with this new information, were now able to trace directly back to Marcus Thorne. The Thorne Protocol was unleashed. Anonymous tips were sent to the SEC regarding stock manipulation. Evidence of insider trading was leaked to the Wall Street Journal. Key engineers at Thorne Industries were poached with astronomical offers. A major European contract Thorne was about to sign was suddenly and inexplicably cancelled after the CEO received a dossier on Thorne's unethical labor practices in Southeast Asia. Marcus Thorne was bleeding and he had no idea where the attacks were coming from. He was flailing, his paranoia growing. He was calling Julian, leaving furious, accusatory voicemails. Julian ignored them all. He would not give Marcus the satisfaction of a confrontation until the time was right. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday afternoon. Amelia, looking through a box of her grandmother's old things that had been brought from the nursing home, found a small leather-bound journal. Most of it was filled with sketches and notes about art. But in the back there were several pages written in a frantic, terrified scrawl. It was Elara's account of her last days before she died. It detailed Marcus's threats, his chilling words, his specific demands. It was a confession written by the victim. It was the nail for the coffin. Julian had the journal authenticated. Now he was ready. He sent a single text message to Marcus Thorne. "My office, 1 hour. Come alone." He was going to enjoy this. Marcus Thorne strode into the lobby of Croft Innovations like a conquering general, but Julian, watching on a security monitor from his 80th floor office, could see the cracks in his facade. The arrogant swagger was still there, but his eyes were constantly scanning. His jaw was tight, and there was a sheen of sweat on his brow. He was a predator who sensed a trap, but was too proud to avoid it. Julian's office was a monument to minimalist power. It was vast and uncluttered, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of New York City. The only furniture was a massive obsidian desk and two starkly elegant chairs facing it. Julian sat behind the desk, not in his usual high-backed throne, but in a chair identical to the visitors. He wanted them to be on equal footing for this. He wanted to look Marcus directly in the eye. The door opened, and Marcus entered, flanked by two of his own bodyguards. David Chen and another of Julian's men stepped forward, blocking their path. "Mr. Croft is expecting Mr. Thorne. Alone." Chen said, his voice flat and unyielding. Marcus waved his men off with a flicker of irritation. "It's fine," he snarled. The door closed, leaving the two men alone, the silence in the cavernous office charged with 40 years of animosity. "Julian." Marcus began, his voice a low growl, as he paced in front of the desk. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. My company is under attack. My life is being systematically dismantled. I know it's you. This has your stink all over it. Cold, precise, cowardly." Julian remained silent, his hands resting calmly on the desk. He simply watched Marcus, letting his rage and paranoia fill the room. "Is this about the Henderson deal?" Marcus spat. "Or is this just your ego so fragile that you can't stand to see me succeed? After all these years, you still can't get over the fact that I built my own empire after you threw me out of yours." "Sit down, Marcus," Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it held an authority that made Marcus halt his pacing. He glared at Julian for a moment, before sinking into the chair opposite the desk. "Talk," Marcus demanded. Instead of talking, Julian tapped the surface of his desk. A holographic display shimmered to life between them, showing a high-resolution scan of a page from a journal. It was Elara's handwriting. Marcus's eyes flickered towards the display. A tiny, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in his cheek. He feigned indifference. "What is this poetry?" "It's a confession," Julian said softly. "A very detailed one. About a young man who was so twisted by jealousy and entitlement that he threatened to destroy the woman he supposedly wanted and the man she loved." Julian tapped the desk again. An audio file began to play. It was the scratchy recorded voice of Albert Wesker, the former coroner, detailing how he was paid to switch dental records on a Jane Doe to fake a death. Marcus's mask of arrogance began to crack. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty grey. "Old stories. Hearsay from a degenerate gambler. This is pathetic, Julian. This is what you have. It's a start," Julian said, his voice remaining chillingly calm. He brought up a new file, a complex web of financial transactions, tracing the $50,000 bribe from Marcus's offshore account to Wesker. "The SEC will find this particularly interesting, especially since that same account was used for the insider trading you committed last year." Marcus stared at the evidence, his breathing growing ragged. He was trapped. He knew it. The predator was finally in the cage. "Elara." Marcus whispered the name, sounding like a curse on his lips. "She's alive." It wasn't a question. It was a horrified realization. "Yes," Julian said, and for the first time he allowed the raw, glacial fury to show in his eyes. "No thanks to you. You left her to rot. You let her live in fear for 40 years while you built your fortune on the company we started. You stood next to me, and pretended to mourn her. "You don't understand," Marcus stammered, his bravado completely gone, replaced by the desperate panic of a cornered animal. "I loved her. You were going to drag her into this ugly world. I was protecting her. You loved what she represented," Julian roared, slamming his hand on the desk, the sudden violence making Marcus flinch. "She was a possession. Something I had that you coveted. You didn't protect her. You put her in a cage. You buried her alive." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Marcus. "For 40 years I've carried that grief. It was the engine of my success. I built this entire world," he said, gesturing to the city below, "on a foundation of her memory. And you knew it was all a lie." "What do you want, Julian?" Marcus asked, his voice weak. "Money. You have more than God. My company. Take it. It's yours." Julian turned around slowly, a humorless smile on his face. "Your company is already a carcass, Marcus. My people are picking it clean as we speak. By tomorrow you'll be facing federal investigations that will last you the rest of your life. Your name will be synonymous with fraud and disgrace. No, I don't want your company." He walked back to the desk and leaned over it, his face just inches from Marcus's. "I want the one thing you can never get back. I want your time. You stole 40 years from me and from her. Now you will spend whatever time you have left in a prison of your own, making broke alone and forgotten. You will be a ghost, Marcus, just like you made her." Julian pressed a hidden button on his desk. "David, send in our guests." The door opened. It wasn't security. It was 2 stone-faced FBI agents in dark suits. They walked towards Marcus, who looked up at them with the dead eyes of a man whose world had just ended. "Marcus Thorne," the lead agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering." As they pulled a stunned Marcus to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back, his eyes met Julian's one last time. There was no hatred left in them, only a hollow, empty understanding. Julian watched them lead him away. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound, aching emptiness. He had won. He had exacted his revenge. But it wouldn't give him back the years. It wouldn't heal Elara. And it wouldn't erase the memory of the promise he had failed to keep. The private wing of Mount Sinai was less like a hospital and more like a 5-star hotel. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the corner suite overlooking Central Park. The constant beeping and sterile scintille of a typical hospital room were replaced by the quiet hum of state-of-the-art medical equipment, tastefully hidden, and the faint scent of fresh flowers from a vase filled with white lilies. Elara Vance lay in the bed, looking frail and small against the pristine white sheets. 40 years had changed her. Her once vibrant auburn hair was now thin and silver. Her skin was as delicate and translucent as old parchment. And her artist's hands were gnarled with arthritis. But her eyes, when they opened to see Julian standing in the doorway, her eyes were the same. They held the same warmth, the same intelligence, the same soul-deep recognition that had captivated him all those years ago. Amelia was sitting by the bed, holding her grandmother's hand. She gave Julian a small, encouraging smile and quietly slipped out of the room, giving them their moment. Julian walked slowly towards the bed, his heart a painful, heavy weight in his chest. This was the moment he had both dreaded and yearned for. What do you say to a ghost? How do you bridge a 40-year chasm of lies and loss? Julian, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. My king in a glass castle. He reached the bedside and gently took her hand. It felt impossibly fragile in his. He couldn't speak. The words were trapped behind a wall of emotion so immense it threatened to break him. I'm sorry, she said, tears welling in her ancient, beautiful eyes. I was so scared. He was a monster. I knew he would hurt you. I thought if I disappeared you would be safe. You could build your empire. I would have burned it to the ground for one more day with you. He finally managed to say, his voice thick. I would have traded all of it. I know. She smiled, a faint, sad smile. That's why I had to leave. Your fire was too bright to be put out for my sake. They sat in silence for a long time, their hands clasped together, communicating more in that quiet touch than words ever could. He told her about his life, the hollow victories, the meaningless acquisitions, the lonely penthouse. She told him about hers, about raising her daughter Sarah in secret, always looking over her shoulder. She told him about her joy in becoming a grandmother to Amelia, a bright spark who had her spirit. She had lived a small, quiet life, always under the shadow of Marcus Thorne's threat. He's gone, Julian told her gently. He'll never hurt anyone again. A look of profound relief washed over her face, and for the first time in 40 years, the fear in her eyes was finally extinguished. You kept your promise, Julian Croft, she whispered, her eyelids growing heavy. You found me. You kept me safe. The doctors had been clear. Her condition was advanced, the years of stress and inadequate medical care having taken their toll. They could make her comfortable. They could give her a little more time, but they couldn't give her a future. Julian didn't leave her side for the next 2 weeks. He had his office moved to the hospital suite. He took calls and ran his global enterprise from the chair beside her bed. He read to her. He listened to her stories, and sometimes they just sat in silence, watching the seasons change in the park below. He was giving her, in her final days, the life they should have had. In a strange, bittersweet way, he was finally home. Amelia was there every day. Julian saw so much of Elara in her kindness, her resilience, her artist's soul. He learned that her dream was to be a museum curator, to share the beauty of art with the world, just as her grandmother had once shared it with him. Elara passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning, as the sun was rising over the reservoir, her hand in Julian's. Her last word was his name. After the small, private funeral, Julian found himself at a crossroads. The rage that had fueled him was gone. The grief that had shaped him had transformed. He was no longer the cold, empty man who had walked into the gilded steer. A month later, he called Amelia to his office. Your student loans have been paid, he said, getting straight to the point. A trust has been established in your name. You will never have to worry about money again. You can quit your jobs and focus on your studies. Amelia was speechless. Julian, I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not a gift, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It's an investment. Elara, she saw the world in a way I never could. She saw beauty. You have that same gift. The world needs people like you. He slid a brochure across the desk. It was for the Croft Foundation, his philanthropic arm. I'm creating a new wing of the foundation, he explained. The Elara Vance Initiative for the Arts. It will fund museums, grant scholarships to young artists, and preserve cultural heritage. Its endowment will be $1 billion, and I need someone to run it." Amelia stared at him, her honey-colored eyes wide with disbelief. "But I'm just a student." "You are Elara's legacy," he said, "and you have a fire in you that reminds me of her. This foundation isn't about me. It's about honoring her, and I can think of no one better to be its guardian." That afternoon, Julian left his office early. He had Thomas drive him not to his penthouse, but to the university campus he hadn't set foot on in 40 years. He found the spot by the lake. The old willow tree was still there, bigger and more majestic than he remembered, its branches weeping to the ground, creating that same secret, sacred space. He stood beneath its branches, the setting sun filtering through the leaves, and for the first time since he was a boy, Julian Croft wept. He wept for the love he had lost, for the years that were stolen, and for the promise that had in the end finally been kept. He had his empire, his glass castle, but he knew now that the greatest treasures were not the ones you could buy, but the ones you held in your heart, a memory, a promise, and the enduring echo of a lost love. Julian Croft's story teaches us that no matter how high we build our walls, no matter how much wealth we accumulate, a single echo from the past can bring it all tumbling down. It's a powerful reminder that our lives are defined not by our successes, but by the promises we keep and the love we hold on to. He was a billionaire who could buy anything except a second chance. But through a simple note passed by a struggling waitress, he was given something far more valuable: redemption. He found that true wealth isn't in a stock portfolio, but in honoring a memory and shaping a better future. What did you think of Julian's journey? Was his revenge on Marcus justified? And what does it say about the promises we make in our own lives? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you speechless. Thank you for listening.